In December 2006, the last Tower Records stores in America closed their doors. 40 years earlier, a man named Russ Solomon had opened the first one in Sacramento, California. In between, Tower Records became a global institution, the place where serious music fans went to browse, to discover, and to belong. The common story says the internet killed it. That story is incomplete. Tower Records was not a victim of a single force. It was a company that borrowed heavily to build an empire, then found that the debt arrived before the digital revolution did. This is the story of how a record store grew from a drugstore counter into an international chain, and how the financial decisions that funded its expansion became the trap that destroyed it. The internet was a factor. It was not the cause. The story begins in 1941, when Russ Solomon was 16 years old. He started selling used jukebox records out of his father's drugstore in Sacramento. The drugstore sat in a building shared with the Tower Theater, which would eventually lend its name to the business. Solomon's first attempt at a standalone record business did not survive. By 1960, creditors had forced him to close. He borrowed $5,000 from his father, started a company called MTS Incorporated, and reopened in December 1961 at a new location on Watt Avenue. That store became the foundation of Tower Records. The concept was simple: deep catalog, knowledgeable staff, and a willingness to stock titles that other stores would not carry. Tower Records was the place that had what you were looking for, and if it did not, someone who worked there could tell you where to find it. From Sacramento, Solomon expanded to San Francisco, then to Los Angeles in 1970, where the famous Sunset Boulevard store opened in 1971. Over the next 2 decades, Tower Records spread to New York, Nashville, London, Tokyo, Dublin, and at least a dozen more cities across the world. By the mid-1990s, Tower Records was not just a store. It was a destination. The company also moved online early. Tower.com launched in 1995, making it one of the first retailers of any kind to sell on the internet. But having a website and building a digital business are not the same thing, and the early move online did not translate into the digital competence that would matter a decade later. The decision that would destroy Tower Records was made in 1998. In May of that year, MTS Incorporated sold $110 million worth of notes to finance more international growth. It also secured a $275 million line of credit from a group of large banks. This was not reckless in the way that word is usually used. Tower Records was profitable at the time. The company had reported $76 million in profit over the previous 9 months. The debt was supposed to fund the next wave of expansion: more stores, more countries, more growth. 1 year later, the company reported its first loss. The loan interest payments had turned a profit into a deficit. Tower Records continued to expand, but it never recovered from the debt burden it took on in 1998. This is the part of the story that most retellings skip. The familiar narrative says that Napster, iTunes, and big box retailers like Walmart and Best Buy eroded Tower's business. That is true, but it is only part of the picture. Tower Records was already losing money before those pressures became decisive. The debt load meant that when the competitive environment worsened, the company had no margin to absorb the impact. There was also a 2002 settlement in which Tower Records, alongside other retailers, agreed to pay a $3 million fine as part of a 41-state CD price fixing case. The broader settlement totaled $67 million in fines and $75 million in CD restitution. The price-fixing investigation revealed that between 1995 and 2000, customers had been overcharged by an estimated $500 million. This was not the cause of Tower's collapse, but it reflected an industry whose pricing model was already under pressure. Tower Records filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy for the first time in 2004. By February of that year, its debt was estimated at $80 to $100 million, with assets totaling just over $100 million. The first bankruptcy deal imposed restrictions that made recovery harder, not easier. Mismanagement and crippling constraints from that first bankruptcy deal compounded the problems. The company filed for Chapter 11, a second time on August 20, 2006, this time to facilitate a sale before the holiday season. On October 6, 2006, Great American Group won an auction for Tower Records assets and began liquidation the next day. Going out of business sales began at all United States locations. The last Tower Records stores in America closed on December 22, 2006, 40 years after Solomon had opened the first one. The causes were multiple, and they interacted. The heavy debt from the 1990s expansion, growing competition from mass discounters like Walmart and Best Buy, internet piracy, mismanagement, and the restrictions imposed by the first bankruptcy agreement. Any one of these alone might have been survivable. Together, they were not. It is worth noting, as Robert Moog, the inventor of the Moog synthesizer, observed at the time, that Tower Records and other megastore chains had themselves driven many neighborhood record stores out of business before facing their own decline. The cycle of displacement was not new. In 2015, the filmmaker Colin Hanks released a documentary called All Things Must Pass, which chronicled the rise and fall of Tower Records using archival footage and interviews with former staff, including Russ Solomon himself. The film was warmly received, but reviewers noted that it did not address the criticism that Tower Records had itself displaced independent record stores. The documentary celebrated the institution without fully examining its role in the retail ecosystem it helped to transform. The broader lesson is not that the internet killed Tower Records. It did not act alone. The decisive mistake was made years before the digital revolution arrived in force. In 1998, Tower Records borrowed to build an empire, and the debt arrived before the future did. When the environment changed, when discounters, piracy, and digital distribution arrived, the company had no room to adapt because it was already paying for the past. Tower Records did not die because the internet arrived. It died because it borrowed to build an empire, and the debt arrived first.